Hey everybody, this is Rod Meldrum, the Book of Mormon evidence guy, and we are about to embark on quite an amazing journey here. I've got Lee Andersen here with me. He is the son of Verlin Anderson, and he has quite an amazing legacy we're going to be talking about. But before we get into it, I just want to thank everybody for being a part of our channel. If you have been liking the content that we're producing, go ahead and hit the like button right there down below. I will have to say that at the onset here that there's a lot of podcasters and so forth that want to do really kind of sensational stuff and whatever the latest thing is. We're actually kind of taking a little bit of a step back to our origins, back to principles that are eternal in nature, not whether or not, we're not talking about, all these different things that are kind of hot topics right now with, Brigham Young and all the other things that are going on there. We want to get back to some core values, some core teachings and principles that are really foundational, I think, as far as our understanding of where we are in the world today. If you want to know about the future, then study the past. And
it's the key to the future.
It's the key to the future. So we've had a couple of podcasts already where we've had some pretty good talks, but we never got to go into, Lee, the actual books. We're kind of focused here a little bit on this book that was just fairly recently actually just published, and it's called The Works of H. Verlan Anderson. So hopefully you can see this here on the thing here. There's a nice picture of your mom and dad on the back here, and this is a combination of works that spanned from the 1940s,
late 40s.
And it still has impact today. Now, I learned first about your dad through my dad. My father was quite a patriot, and he loved the Constitution. He loved the Book of Mormon, and that's probably the reason why this is his original copy of the Book of Mormon and the Constitution by your father. And I think he was involved with some different patriot groups and so forth. And I'm not sure up in Logan, Utah, if it had to do with the John Birch Society or who. But this was my first really exposure to your father. And since that time, I feel like my life and the life of your family has gotten kind of intertwined.
Yes, we have.
I don't think we ever. In fact, on the previous ones, I'm just recalling now, I don't think we ever really explained how it was that we met.
Well, it's kind of rather unusual in that aspect alone. I don't know how far to go with this, but I was the bishop of the Nauvoo First Ward. I've always felt that of all the places to be a bishop, that was probably the Nauvoo First Ward is kind of a unique place to be one. And while I was there, Rod gave us a call asking me if we could find a place for him to speak and present his material concerning
the Book of Mormon.
The Book of Mormon and where the whole thing took place. And we were just intrigued by what he had to say. And when he came and talked to us, we loved the man at first sight. He's been more like a brother than anything else.
Yeah.
And my wife knew some people there. And the first place I think they went to, we got to open up was the bookstore there, and open it up. And Rod made his presentation there, and it was to almost all the missionaries that were on the site.
Yeah.
And it just kind of blew the lid off, literally. And so then the next time we managed to get a hold of used to be a go-kart track down below, and it had a much, much larger auditorium that we could use.
I see about like 150 or 200 people, I think.
At least. We had all the missionaries and then a bunch of people that were curious about what Rod was talking about. That's where we met Wayne May, and later on, Elder Hartman Rector Jr. came on one of your tours, and Love that man. Oh, I love him. At any rate, from there on, it's just been, and that was, golly, what year was that? 2007?
Probably back then. I was just trying to remember though, if I had gotten your phone number from your brother, did I know Hans first?
Yes.
I think that's where
You knew him
it happened,
first,
because he's been our accountant for ever
Ages.
since we moved to Utah, I think. But yeah, so your brother Hans was actually the one that I think that gave us your number, said, "Hey, you're out there," and then I got in touch with you because I at the time. I really couldn't afford a hotel, and there's really not a hotel. Well, there's a couple of hotels.
If you're willing to pay an arm and a leg, and
but they were expensive, and so I was looking to find a place also to stay in. And I had the privilege and honor of staying with you in your wonderful home there in Nauvoo. And I'll never forget I don't know how we got any sleep. I remember we stayed up several times till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And your wonderful wife Phyllis, who's here with us actually today. Thank you for being here, Phyllis. She put up with us doing that and taking care of us. But I'll never forget one other little time. There's a guy who was given about $500,000 to go and find the evidences for the Book of Mormon down in Central America.
Yeah.
And
Ferguson.
And it was can't remember his first name, Ferguson, but anyway, but his son, Larry came to stay with you at your home, and this is after we had already met and had been we've done a few things together. And I'll never forget. So Larry called me and said, "Hey, so I'm staying with this friend of mine, and he says the only that he has a room for me to stay in, but only on one condition." I says, "Well, what was that condition?" He says, "You have to watch this 5 DVD set. It's like 8 or 9 hours." And then he says, "If you'll watch this, then you can go ahead and stay with us." So Larry, so I guess Larry watched these like 8 hours. It was my first DVD set. And after watching the DVD set, he wanted to meet with us. And so I was just coming through on a tour. And so I always have teased Larry and other people when I talk to Larry or introduce him or whatever, is that that we actually met in jail. Yeah. Larry and I were both in jail together, and that's how I first met Larry. But we were in good company because Elder Hartman Rector Jr. was with us in the jail too, and the jail happened to be, the Carthage jail. So he came to meet with us. But it was because of your influence and having him watch those videos that he confided to me at one point. He said, my dad, who, like I said, received $500,000 to go down to Central America and to prove the evidences of the Book of Mormon down there. And after about 5 years and going through that $500,000, he came back and ended up writing a letter to the First Presidency of the church, basically saying, there's no evidence for the Book of Mormon, and there never will be. And he essentially he still continued to go to church, but he was at that point really not a believer anymore. Yeah. And Larry told me, he says, if my dad would have had the kind of information that I saw on those DVDs, he said he would have never left the church. And Larry has been a big supporter of our research ever since then.
Yes.
But that's thanks to you.
Oh, I'm the humbug in the whole thing.
But we didn't come here to talk about that and Larry and so forth. We actually, I wanted to expose our viewers to some really powerful information. I think is, like I said, is foundational. And when I say that, essentially, you are a wonderful protege of your father. I think.
Thank you.
It would be hard to fill his shoes.
You can't. I can't. All I can do is strive to further his work. And like I say, he, or like we mentioned, he started his study of the Book of Mormon in his home in Blue Creek, Utah. And I know everybody knows where Blue Creek is.
Oh, of course, Blue Creek. Where was that again?
It's just a little bit north of Logan.
Oh, Logan. Okay, I recognize Logan. Okay, there we go. Blue Creek.
Yeah.
There's Benson and Richmond and Smithfield.
Yeah, but Blue Creek is
a special place.
Yeah, it is. At any rate, there's
So you were telling us just a little bit about his growing up, but tell us how, I mean, like, why did he have such a love for the Book of Mormon, and how did he get started?
Well, this goes back to when he was born, actually. His mother, Manoah Anderson, one of the most angelic people on the face of the earth that's ever lived, except for my wife.
Shout out to you, fellas.
She literally followed the directions of the Lord on teaching her children at home about God. And so he was raised and learned to read. He couldn't even go to school. They lived in a place where school was so far away that it was either be taught at home or not learn at all. And so she taught him to read.
This is back in what time frame again?
This would have been, well, Dad was born in 1914.
Okay.
And so this would have been about 1920.
Yeah.
He was 5 or 6 years old, and she taught him to read, and they used the Book of Mormon as their text. And that's what he learned from. And the advice that Grandma Anderson gave him was, if you ever have a question or a concern, you will find your answer in the Book of Mormon. It is complete with everything you need to know if you're willing to search it out. Mm-hmm. The Lord doesn't just drop it in your lap. He expects you to work for it. At any rate, by the time he grew up in that era, they eventually moved to a little town in New Mexico called Verlin. Everybody knows where that is, I'm sure, which is right across the border from Duncan.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It's in the United States.
Somewhere. Okay.
At any rate, that's where he was raised, and several miracles happened in his life. He broke his arm when he was a little boy, and his left arm, he was left-handed, and he broke his left arm, or his right arm, excuse me. He broke his right arm, and ever after that, he was left-handed. And then when he was a little boy, he and his sister, Aunt Zelda, were sent out, and they sat on a disc to give it weight so that it would pull the plow, and he fell off the front of it, and it cut his eye and his tongue and everything. These things looked so horrible at the time, but it didn't seem to stop him much. He was a basketball player in high school. He was called Chick. That was
was it Logan High School, or was it another high school?
No, this
was back in.
This is in Verlin.
In Verlin, okay.
And Duncan. At any rate, he went around with some guys. One's name was Bulldog and Spooks. And they had names for one another. I don't know that we do that much anymore.
we don't seem to do that much anymore, do we?
At any rate, when he grew up, World War II had started, and he went and enlisted with all the men that were going in, and they rejected him, made him 4F because he couldn't salute with his right arm.
Oh, wow.
And so they just said, well, you're 4F. And so they sent him home. And interestingly enough, the group of men that he would have gone in with were captured and were in the Bataan death march.
Oh,
and the
goodness.
Odds are almost 100% he would never have come home. And so we realized that those things that seemed so horrible to happen, breaking his arm and being run over by a disc, in the end were a salvation, in that it kept him where the Lord wanted him to perform his works.
I love those kind of stories, because so many people get so concerned when bad things happen to them, or things that they think are bad. They don't realize that God is just making the way for better things to come.
He's providing the way, not the excuse, but the way for him to go forward. At any rate, my mother was born in 1920, which is interesting, and they met and got married. And in 1945, 45, he went back to Stanford University, and he studied, and I think he was studying accounting there. Don't hold me to that, because I wasn't there in that sense. I arrived later. I arrived in 1945. It's interesting that I was born on the way to the hospital, so I beat my mother to the hospital. I've been ahead of her ever since, they said. At any rate, he graduated from Stanford. I believe it was in 1946.
Wow.
They moved to Mesa, Arizona, where he became an attorney there. Or I think he was practicing law. At any rate, he left, and in 1948, he graduated from Harvard.
So both Stanford and Harvard.
Both Stanford and Harvard.
So,
and he got his law degree from Harvard, and then came back to Provo, where he taught business law and accounting. And
at BYU.
At BYU,
Yeah.
correct. Ernest Wilkinson asked him to come, and he came. And they were fast friends until Ernest Wilkinson passed away. In fact, it's kind of interesting that when my wife and I got married, we had both the president of Brigham Young University and the president of Utah Valley Community College come to our wedding. To our wedding reception, excuse me.
Yeah.
So kind of unusual, but that's okay. And so at any rate, in 1948, though, Dad came back from Harvard, and it was while he was at Harvard. I don't know if I've told this story. Please forgive me for repeating myself. He had questions about the Book of Mormon and the Constitution, and he worried that he might find doctrine that was not accurate. And so he went right straight to the Book of Mormon. And it was in studying the Book of Mormon that he began to understand the power and the significance of our Constitution. And I know many people belittle the Constitution. They don't understand that it is a gift from God,
yeah,
by men whom God raised up unto this very purpose. And in section 109 of the Doctrine and Covenants, I think it's verse 54, it talks about the fact that the principles of the Constitution will be forever. As Dad studied that and understood it, he began to apply the principles that he found in the Book of Mormon to the Constitution. And in so doing, he realized that the 125 years of the reign of the judges is closely aligned with our Constitution today.
Yeah.
As you study, you find out that Mosiah received the laws that the people lived under in the Book of Mormon, and that Alma, the first chief judge, continued to apply those principles to those people. And so when you look at the Book of Mormon and the reign of the judges, it coincides almost verbatim, almost in lockstep, if you will, with our Constitution. Mm-hmm. So those who belittle and degrade the Constitution looking for fault truly do not understand what the Lord had in mind and how this country was established and why. And if we take the time to understand those things, we will become more acquainted with the heritage that we have been given by some of the greatest men that have ever lived.
Yeah. So your dad put this together. This book here that my dad had, that I inherited, and then I became a lover of this book as well.
Mm-hmm.
This was published back in 1995.
That's
but this
way
was
late publication.
This is much later publication. But just to mention one little thing, and that is that I think partially because of your dad's work and so forth, but the Stoddard family, actually, Hannah and
Mm-hmm.
James Stoddard, they produced this DVD. It's called For Our Day, Divinely Sanctioned Governments, Exploring the Prophetic Parallels in the Book of Mormon. And in this one, I was just amazed, because basically the Stoddard family went through and they said there's only been 2 times in the history of the world where God has condoned or endorsed a particular form of government. And one of them was what you just mentioned, the reign of the judges in the Book of Mormon. And the second one is the Constitution.
Exactly right.
Where the Lord said that it was, it was justified before him.
Yes.
And your father was one of those early people to understand the significance of that.
Well, in 1948, after he got back from Stanford, and was working at BYU, they asked him to give some lectures. And that's when you start with my father's books. Actually, all 5 of these books, pamphlets, syllabuses, whatever you want to call them, all were kind of written simultaneously. They weren't all published at the same time.
Okay.
But he started off with what, what's it called? I never can remember the name of this first book, because it was a syllabus he used.
And was that ever published? I mean,
yeah, it finally was.
Until now, of course.
He used this syllabus called Man-Made Law in a Changing World, and it was four separate lectures that he gave at Leadership Week. Now, not a lot of people know that Leadership Week...
What is Leadership Week?
Well, Leadership Week started in 1922 by the church, and it was mainly for leaders to come and receive counsel and teaching from the brethren, if you will, or from people that were knowledgeable. And Dad started teaching at that, and I'm guessing, I don't know this for a fact, but around 1950 or 51 or 52, right in there. At any rate, these 4 lectures that he came up, Man-Made Law in a Changing World, were designed to be given to Leadership Week people, the ones that came. And in 1964, the church changed the name from Leadership Week to Education Week.
So this is the precursor.
This is the precursor to Education
to
Week.
that. So originally they just had the leaders, but then they decided to open it up
to the public, and it actually was
members in general. Okay.
Even as Leadership Week, it was opened up to it was open to the public.
Oh,
but not many people were aware of it until they started advertising, pushing it, and everything else. And Dad gave these 4 lectures during that time, and my Aunt Zelda, when she would go to she would come up in 1956, 57, 58. She said, it's so hard to get into Verlin's classes. They're always packed. And so we laughed about that. But Dad was a very, very, not just intelligent and lucid, but persuasive in his teachings.
Yeah.
He tried to get people to understand certain things. In fact, all 5 of these dissertations, if you will, covered the same thing, but they covered it each time in a different way, directed towards a different audience. Man-Made Law in a Changing World was for Leadership Week or Education Week, and he continued to do that. I know when I went on my mission in 1964, he was still doing that. My sisters went with him, and they would sing, so that brought a little more diversity, if you will. But at any rate, he would teach these things. And I don't know when he quit teaching them. I know that he was in California and Nevada and Arizona and Utah, different states, and he gave these 4 lectures. And they covered, interestingly enough, the very things that he covered in the moral basis of a free society. But they were in 4 lectures that he gave during Education Leadership Week. But the moral basis of a free society, which he taught, was given to his law students, his business law students. It was the first 2 weeks of each year. And what you got there?
Well, I just happen to have a copy of
Where did you get that?
The moral basis of the
moral
free
basis
society by H. Verlin Andersen. And I got this from my father.
Oh my goodness.
Now he was not, he never went to law school. So I'm not sure where he ended up getting it. This is copyright 1975 and 7th printing of 1989.
Well, this was going on long before those things. Believe me. Somebody must have. Okay.
This is some of our
own highlights
and so forth already in there, in the introductions and things like that. So
all I could tell.
So this was never published before, right?
Not that I know of. It was not published into a.
It was just for the law school.
Yeah, it was for his law students, and so how you got that is kind of a.
I don't know.
Boy, I wish. If that book could speak, I would love to hear its history.
Yeah. Oh
wow.
my goodness! But if you take a look at just the table of contents here, the reign of law, the universal desire for freedom, the natural laws governing freedom, justice according to the golden rule, the United States Constitution, criminal law, tort law, contract law, the nature of wealth, the nature of property rights, limitations of government power, procedures which must be followed by government in the exercise of its powers, and administrative laws and the law of stewardships. This is some pretty heavy stuff.
Well, it was written for law students.
Here, Check it out.
In fact, when I read this book, it's the first time I came to understand the difference between criminal law and tort law, and contract law and legislative law. I hadn't realized that. Okay. You caught me a little off guard with that one. Let me just go into a second and maybe explain the difference between each one of those things, because all of his 5 books that he's got cover this to some extent. What we call criminal law is when somebody breaks the law. That's pretty easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they rob a bank or hold somebody up or threaten somebody, that's called criminal law. And so then you go to court, and if he is convicted, then he has to pay a price. But usually when somebody has done something wrong, like rob a bank or a store or something like that, then there's been damage done, and that's when you get into tort law. Tort, by the way, is Latin for mistake. And we use it in French. If you speak French, si vous parlez français, on dit un tort. You don't actually pronounce the T, but it means you've made a mistake.
I thought tort was something the French made that you eat. And in Italy, it's tortellini.
Tortellini, okay. No, that's Spanish for taco. I don't know. At any rate, and then you get contract law, and that's where 2 companies get together and they make a contract, and they're going to fulfill their contract. And if somebody doesn't, then you get in contract law. Yeah. The last one, legislative law or administrative law, if you will, applies almost strictly to government. And this is where Dad started to separate the sheep from the goats. He understood that administrative law was usually made to control someone or something so that others could benefit and deprive others of the same benefit. Now, that sounds like a funny way to say it, but what they did is it's called cheating, if you want to get down to it. But that's what most of your legislative or administrative law is. They pass a law and say, okay, you can practice. Since I used to be a plumber, I had to pass the plumbing exam in 4 different states, in the 3 different states that I lived in, Arizona, Utah, and Illinois. So I could continue to practice my trade, and each one made sure that I could meet their standards, which I can honestly say are ludicrous. I've only had 2 licenses that I've received where everything they taught you was a matter of life and death. You did not play with them. One of them was my diving license, so I could dive. Mm-hmm. And believe me, everything they teach you, scuba diving, everything you do in scuba diving is, if you don't learn how to breathe, decompress, you can do, you die. And the other one is my pilot's license. And there again, they don't teach you superfluous or frivolous things. If you don't understand navigation, altitude, pressures, wind shear, you know that people don't know that a wing can ice up at 70 degrees. Huh? Well, it's just a fact that when you hit certain spots and the wind rushes over it, it lowers the temperature to such a point that it will actually cause your wings to ice up. And that's at 70-degree weather. Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't understand these principles and you're flying, you're going to fly into what we call cumulogranite. There's cumulonimbus clouds and cumulus clouds and stuff like that. You can fly through those. But cumulogranite, it doesn't work. Cumulogranite is really hard.
Huh. I thought clouds are soft and fluffy.
Not granite. At any rate,
so if you fly into that, basically it has so much water content that it basically will ice up the wings almost every time.
Yeah, granite, I'm just talking literally, cumulo mountain is what you don't fly through.
Okay, cumulogranite. I thought you were talking about some kind of a cloud formation.
Yeah, it is a cloud formation made out of granite and substrate. It's interesting.
And you don't find it out on the plains much.
No, you don't. Okay. I've never found anybody that made it through, but I can tell you stories of pilots that took off, didn't set their altimeter correctly for the pressure that they were at. They thought they were at 14,000 feet. They were 10, and you can find that plane up on the side of Mount Timpanogos, literally.
Yeah.
And it's kind of tough on them.
Yeah.
but that's what I'm trying to say is there's nature's laws and you do not violate them. You don't jump
only at your own peril.
Well, if you feel like you want to do that, go ahead. But I know what the outcome will be. And so at any rate, Dad, in his teaching of legislative law or administrative law, came to find out that they were in complete violation of God's laws. And so as he wrote the first syllabus, Man-Made Law in a Changing World, in which he taught, then he started teaching it to his law students, and that's where the moral basis of a free society came from. He spent more time on that particular book, over 35 years. In fact, it was not even printed until after he died in 1992. It was finally put in full print as a book. That's why when I see that copy, and I know it goes back to as early as 1948, 49, that's amazing. But it was actually printed up in book form in 1995.
Okay, so it was printed then in book form.
Yeah, finally.
Okay.
And so that's where the moral basis of a free society. Well, he ran into some interesting challenges during that time with priesthood leaders not understanding properly their role and understanding of law. And you think, why would a priesthood leader need to know anything about law? And so he wrote this book called Many Are Called, But Few Are Chosen, which is taken from section 121 of the Doctrine and Covenants. Starting in verse 34, if you want to read it.
And that's in this book.
And that's in the big
new
book.
Yeah.
And he wrote that mainly to priesthood leaders, trying to get them to understand that when you exercise unrighteous dominion or control, unrighteous control over the souls of the children of men in any degree of unrighteousness, amen to the priesthood or the authority of that man. And he tried to get that across, and that, in fact, he was so involved with it and in its understanding that when he was in the state legislature in Utah, up in Salt Lake, he gave each member of the state legislature a copy of that book and hoped that they would read it. I don't know how well it worked, but a few of them, I think, began to understand his position and why he was voted Mr. No. Because he turned
Mr. No in the
state legislature when they would bring up these
not KNOW.
No, just
NO.
He was trying to get people to understand that legislative law did not allow them the right to impose man-made law contrary to God's law. And interestingly enough, it caused quite a stir. And in fact, one guy called up Dad and said, I'm going to have you investigated by the general authorities. And Dad replied, I can't think of a finer body of men to do the investigation. So for him, it was okay. At the same time, though, he was trying to write a book for the general church membership.
Okay.
And that book was known as The Great and Abominable Church of the Devil. And you have a copy of that.
This is my copy of it right here.
And that one raised quite a stir.
Just the title. Just the title alone would cause people to go, okay, so now who is the Great and Abominable Church of the Devil? So this is my copy. This was done in 1972.
That's right. Way back when. In fact, President Benson loved that book so much that he bought it by the case and handed them out to people that came into his office, even while he was the prophet of the church. And so that book was written specifically to church members to help them understand their responsibility, not only to government, but to the church, and more specifically to their children. Chapters 14, 15, and 16 are basically talking about the parents' responsibility to their children. And I think he got that idea from when he was raised by his mother at home under the circumstances of a caring person, someone who loved him for who he was and what he could be.
Chapter 15 is about socialized education and false doctrines. 16 is Latter-day Prophets and socialized education. And then you have the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of the devil.
Well, you need to get 14 in there.
And so on. 14 is about priestcraft.
That I wonder why. We can talk about that another time.
As I've gone through this and seen where my father made a lot of, not this one, it's this
the
one.
other one, yeah,
the other one, where my father made notations and so forth. I mean, the treatise, his treatise on priestcraft and forced priestcraft, he called it forced priestcraft, meaning priestcraft that is being forced on people by their governing system.
Right. And that's where the challenge becomes. Getting back for just 1 second, I'm going to revert back to the Constitution itself. We've talked about the fact that the Constitution is the document that allows us to make laws. The definition of a law is that it either has a punishment or a reward. And nowhere in the Constitution do you have punishments or rewards. You just have statements of fact that we will have a bicameral legislative house. In other words, a Senate and a House. You will have a executive branch that will enforce law and a judicial that will interpret it. So those things are there, but they leave open everybody the right to act accordingly. And when you have your agency, which the United States has, which was given to us by God and enforced through legislative procedure, that's where the government is supposed to do. There's several things that are defined. The government is to coin money. Why? Because you don't want 50 different kinds of money in the United States. Every state has the same money. They are to maintain a military that can protect us. You can go through these different things one at a time and you find out what the federal government can do and what they can't do. And basically, Dad tries to point out the fact that no man can give power to somebody else that they do not have. I can't walk into your house, stick a gun in your ribs and say, I want you to support me in my old age, or I want you to take care of my medical bills, or I want you to educate my children. I can't do that as a person.
Or if my house burns down, I want you to pay for it to
I want you to rebuild my house. No, you can't do those. And then if that is a fact that you cannot do those things as an individual, then you cannot bestow that power on somebody else. You literally break God's laws by doing it.
Yeah.
And these are the natural laws. In fact, Dad's books are all based upon two things as he refers to them: the 10 Commandments and the Golden Rule. And it's surprising to find out how when the Constitution was written and administered originally, that it was based on the 10 Commandments and the Golden Rule. And it's since then, as men have changed it, added things, done things to it that are not proper, misunderstanding, misappropriation of terms, misalignment of definitions, that the Constitution has been literally ripped out of our hands and been turned into a document that almost doesn't apply anymore.
That's one of the things I love about even just the title of this. You call it it wasn't a pamphlet. It was
a syllabus.
Syllabus, the moral basis of a free society. It's interesting to note, and I know if it would be so much fun to have your dad be right here with us and be able to talk about this. But the whole idea, I've had an opportunity to ask this question of audiences all over the United States and around the world. Is there a difference between freedom and liberty? And as I studied that, and you've hit on it a couple times already just today in our conversation, and that is this idea of natural law, and that plays an important part. But I wanted to just point out. So this is a little portion of a presentation that I did involving freedom and liberty. Is there a difference between those two? Are those two words synonymous? Are they the same thing? Do they mean the same thing, or is there differences? And if they are different, then what is the differences? And so I actually went to Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, American Dictionary of the English Language, the first ever English dictionary. And if you take a look at the word free, it says not being under necessity or restraint, either physical or moral. In other words, freedom gives you the right to do whatever you want to.
Mm-hmm.
You can be as righteous as you want to be, and you can also be as wicked as you want to
There's
be.
no limitations.
No limitations. No restraints, either physical or moral restraints. Okay. And freedom is said to be a state of exemption from the power or control of another. So no control
exemptions.
and no power over another person, and nobody has that over you. That's what freedom is all about. Interestingly enough, though, it talks about liberty here, and it says that it's basically the first definition here is freedom from restraint in a general sense. But number 2, it says natural liberty consists in the power of acting as one thinks fit without any restraint or control. And this is the caveat, except from the laws of nature.
Now, what do the laws of nature mean?
We're going to ask Noah Webster this too, because he ended up getting it right. He says religious liberty. This is liberty. This is definition number 5. Religious liberty is the free right of adopting opinions on religious subjects and of worshiping the supreme being according to the dictates of conscience without any external control. And then he goes on. What is nature? In a general sense, whatever is made or produced, a word that comprehends all the works of God.
And that's why they talk about nature and nature's God.
That's right. That's right. And that's what he says right here. Nature is used for the agent, creator, author, producer of things, or for the powers that produce them. We mean that they are produced by God, the creator, the author of whatsoever is made or produced. The opinion that things are produced by inherent powers of matter, independent of a supreme intelligent author, is called atheism.
Yes.
I mean, Noah Webster, he nailed this. And just to finish this off, then we have nature and natural, right? And now we have law, which is definition number 1, a rule, particularly an established or a permanent rule. And number 3 says the law of nature is the rule of conduct arising out of the natural relations of human beings established by the Creator, God, and existing prior to any positive precept. So the laws of nature are basically God's laws.
Exactly.
Okay.
In fact, I don't know where I don't hold me to this, but I heard someplace that Noah Webster felt like he was inspired of God to write down the meaning of words and give them the appropriate definition that would include God.
Yes. Which is the reason why Noah, this is a direct quote from Noah Webster. He says, God's word contained in the Bible has furnished all necessary rules to direct our conduct. Unquote. Now, when you consider that the founding fathers also, Noah Webster was after this, that was back in the 1800s. This is back, you go back to 1776. You have in the Declaration of Independence, actually, where the founding fathers actually talk about this particular concept. It says, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. So they also are making a plea to God and the laws of nature. But the laws of God is what creates a moral basis for a free society. Yes. And you have, this is Patrick Henry, says, millions of people armed in the holy cause of liberty are invincible by any force which our enemies can send against us. Besides, sir, we shall not fight our battles alone. There is a just God who presides over the destiny of nations. And then to finish this up in 2 Nephi. So here we have this wonderful definition by Noah Webster of the difference between liberty and freedom, basically freedom being without any restraint, including any moral restraint. Liberty basically is saying the only restraint that you have is the restraint placed by the laws of nature, or in other words, God. And here we have in the Book of Mormon what I believe is the finest definition of the difference between freedom and liberty that you will find even
Anyway.
better and more concise than Noah Webster's. This is from 2 Nephi chapter 2, verse 27, where he says, "Wherefore men are free according to the flesh."
That's freedom.
By nature of being born,
Mm-hmm.
we become an entity. We become a person. We are an offspring of God. Okay, and that provides us with freedom. Even God himself did not impinge upon the freedom of the children of his children in the preexistence.
That's right.
He gave them the opportunity to choose either his plan of happiness or Satan's. But he also said, but there are consequences when you make the choice.
When you make that
there
choice.
are consequences. Anyway, so then the 2 Nephi goes on. It says they are free to choose, and this is choice number 1, liberty and eternal life through the great mediator of all men, or to choose, this is choice number 2, captivity and death.
According to the captivity and power of the devil.
That's right. And it's interesting because that means that liberty is when you use your freedom to choose to follow God's law. That's what liberty is. And amazingly enough, in our study of the Book of Mormon and so forth, when we talk about this nation above all the nations, it would be a land of liberty. It's interesting that we haven't been able to find a single time, Lee, where any of the founding fathers called the United States of America the land of freedom.
No, they didn't.
They inevitably talked about it as a land of liberty, which is the reason why we have this bell in
the
Philadelphia.
Freedom Bell in Philadelphia.
The Freedom Bell. Yeah. Oh no. And we have the Statue of Freedom in the harbor there in New York and so forth, right? No, it's that, and when you look at that, it's astounding. When you also consider in the Book of Mormon, when the government had become to a certain point corrupted, and you have Captain Moroni, and he's trying to rally the righteous followers of God back to the cause of righteousness. And he pulled off his cloak and he wrote upon it these words, right? And he called it the title of freedom, right?
Wrong.
No, he called it the title of
liberty.
Liberty. So this idea of liberty, but liberty can only work when you have a moral society. I thought I had it in this slide deck here, but I don't have it. But I believe it was Patrick Henry that said that who was it that said that the Constitution is wholly inadequate?
John Adams.
John Adams, that's who it was. Yes.
Right here.
You have that? Can you read that for us?
Because we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion, avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. He was giving that talk to the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Division of the Militia of Massachusetts. That's when he made that statement. And he gave it on October the 11th, 1798. I had to go find the full reference and context, because he was trying to help this group of officers, this militia, to understand why they were being called to serve. And when a people understand why they are called to serve, they are much more willing to do it. Mm-hmm. In fact, with understanding of keeping your religious freedom. It's interesting that when we talk about the First Amendment, I think we've mentioned this before, I get a kick out of it. We always call it the Freedom of Speech Amendment.
Mm-hmm. Right here.
But what else does it cover?
Should we read it?
Well, you can read it, right? I'll just, go ahead and read it.
Go ahead. Well, do you want to do it?
I'm just going to say, basically, it gives you 5 things: freedom of religion, speech, assembly, press, and petition.
Yep.
And every one of those, if you cannot petition the government for redress
of grievances,
you already have lost anything you thought you had. And if you don't have speech or religion or press, everything. And Dad goes through these particular things very, very minutely. He digs into them so that you understand exactly why the Constitution was written and how it is to be applied. Do we do it today that way? No. No, our Constitution has been literally shredded from top to bottom.
Yep.
They've given the people take a portion of it and apply it as if it were the whole. And in reality, it's not even a good portion because they twist it and turn it to meet their own demands, their own definition, and they're seeking position and power in so doing. They're creating literally DEI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's
one of the things where it comes from, where DEI comes from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's its whole purpose, to absolutely destroy individuality and freedom of speech. They put you in jail because you call somebody a name that maybe they deserved. I don't know. But at any rate, you're not allowed. In England right now, they are putting people in prison
for speech.
Yeah. And you're just going, well, is that not what our Justice Department, the DOJ, isn't that what they did with many, many people on January the 6th?
Yeah.
Isn't that what they're doing with these families where a parent goes to the parent-teachers group and talks, and then they come in, arrest them, and put them in jail? I mean, this is happening right now in our country, and I hope Pam Bondi changes it.
Well,
I didn't mean to get political.
Well, the bottom line is that without proper government, I mean, really, almost everything becomes political in one sense or the other. Either you live under a constitutional republic, or you live under what is essentially socialism, or in just a different flavor of socialism is communism.
Yeah, they give it a different name, but it has the same result.
But we have a Department of Education, which I understand may be dissolved soon.
Oh, that would break my heart.
Which has promoted the socialistic values and so forth. But if we let's go back to the very foundations, the moral basis of a free society. The bottom line is that you were hitting on it a little bit before, but you basically said you cannot give to a government any rights or privileges that you do not hold yourself.
Correct.
So how does a government then end up with rights and privileges and being able to regulate and license and censure and so forth people? But people go, well, wait a minute. But for example, I mean, we just had California burning down, right?
Yeah.
And now I think it's Governor Newsom probably is going to be asking for the federal government to step in and rebuild all these millionaire, multi-million-dollar mansions and so forth, right? Because they don't have, they can't get fire insurance. And so anyway, there's a lot to do with that whole thing. But the bottom line is it's the government job to fix everything.
No, but that's the whole point.
And this is the thing about the moral basis of free society. Those things should never be handled by the government. It should be handled by the people. Individual people. When we have a neighbor's house that gets burnt, we shouldn't say, oh, well, we'll just go get your insurance to cover it. No, we come together as a community, as a family, and we fix those things that are needful. Is there a role for government? Absolutely, there's a role. Yeah, but like you said, the Constitution outlines what the role is, and it's primarily keep people out, keep foreigners out, basically, and protect the people. That doesn't mean we police the world. We protect our own, our own country. And other than that, there's and just create the basic laws. And that's really the overall role of the government according to the Constitution.
It is to protect us in our inalienable rights. Right. That's its purpose. And that's why its particular powers are few and defined. Mm-hmm. And all the rest that are given to the states are also few and defined. And the reason for that is because we just mentioned the very thing you just said. You cannot delegate authority you do not have. In other words, I cannot sit in your car and force you to wear a seatbelt. No matter how much I think a seatbelt is necessary, no matter how much protection it can give you, I do not have the right to force you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they have now. I heard one person say a number of years ago, as soon as the seatbelt laws were put in place, he says, that's the end of our government. That's the end of law. We now live under, but I personally say, no, it started as soon as they implemented property tax. The day property tax was instituted anywhere was the day you became a servant, a slave. You no longer had the right to do with your property as you wanted to do. And if people don't believe that, all I ask them is, if you don't think that you are a slave to government right now, try not paying your property tax and see how long you last.
I think it's kind of funny that in the beginning of several of the IRS booklets, for example, it says that this is a voluntary tax system.
Right.
Well, try volunteering out of it.
No.
It's it's completely a forced system.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
People don't realize that in 1913, when they took us off the gold standard and when they instituted the IRS,
there was no income tax.
No, up until 1913. And that's one reason why I think it's kind of funny that Trump wants to institute the external revenue service. And he's going to do it
and abolish the internal revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope he can do it. That would be great. That would give us back. Can you imagine what people could do if they no longer had to pay a tax on the place they lived in, where the government has only one responsibility, and that's to protect us in our inherent and inalienable rights.
Yeah.
That means that we have a responsibility to support the government in that area. But that doesn't mean we suddenly become Freddie the freeloader and that we can distribute wealth all over the world to anybody that somebody feels like it's a good idea.
Well, and this is one of the things that I really wanted to. I don't know if I didn't know if we were going to get into this argument right now, but basically this discussion. But we have the first two laws really that were handed down by the Lord to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The first one was to multiply and replenish the earth.
That seems to be a commandment that was given to Noah also.
Yes. Yes.
And to the rest of us after the flood.
I think it was an eternal commandment.
I don't think the Lord has ever withdrawn it, has he?
Yeah, exactly. But what was the second one? What was the second thing that he told Adam and Eve once they were in the Garden of Eden?
Something about sweat of thy face.
Yeah.
Something.
By the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread.
Yeah.
Now, if you kind of translate that into more modern terms, what would you say?
If I want something, I got to work for it. Oh no, I thought the government's got it. No. Just go over and appropriate it. Be a gaddy-ant and robber.
I think it has to do, and I like to call this. I've had this discussion several times on different podcasts with other podcast groups and so forth. But I think it's basically you don't get something for nothing. And I remember one of my first economics class up at Utah State University, and the professor got up there and he wrote this long acronym on the board, and he says, "Who can tell me what that says or what that acronym is?" And everybody's like looking at each other like, "What?" Because it's several letters long. And he said, "What this stands for is there is no such thing as a free lunch."
You just had you had all these letters up there.
That's the first letter of each one of those words.
An acronym, okay.
The acronym. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And he said, as we go through the economics class, he says, you will realize how true that is. And if you get back to the very foundations of government, of monetary systems, of even what is property, everything, all wealth stems from, and I haven't heard very many people say this, but all wealth comes from God. Now, what does that mean? It's not I'm not talking about an esoteric thing here. I'm talking about all the minerals, the natural resources, all the natural things that the earth has that we pull out of the earth, that we use to create all of the wonderful technologies and all the things that we have and that we do. Everything that we own everything that we can possess as property comes ultimately from God.
Mhm.
And how much does God charge us for it? Nothing. Well, I guess you could say maybe he charges 10%. Okay. But anyway, but I mean, the air we breathe and all these other things, the petroleum, I mean, the wood, I mean, everything that we make,
Mhm.
gold, copper, silver, everything, it all comes from God, but somebody has to pull it out of the earth. Somebody has to put labor into it
To get it.
to make it into something that's usable. Right. And then there's all kinds of process, from transportation to even advertising, all kinds of things. People have to actually put work into it. But this is the problem. If you have an immoral people and they don't want to work for it, they want free stuff. This is the foundations of socialism. This is the foundations of communism. When people want free stuff, they figure out ways of using different powers to achieve not having to work to get free stuff.
Sounds like the Gadianton robbers.
Well, the Gadianton robbers is one of them, but there's three organizations that brought down the Nephite civilization, and that I predict will be
Our downfall.
the downfall of not just the United States, but the entire world, if we don't get our heads wrapped around this idea that you cannot live on somebody else's stuff. Free stuff. When the three groups that basically destroyed the Nephite religion, or I should say the Nephite civilization, you have their perennial enemies. You have the Lamanites, right? And what was their big beef? Their big beef was, we were wronged. We were rich before when we were over in Jerusalem, and then Nephi he wronged us. He stole our inheritance.
Our power.
Yeah, they already knew that it wasn't Nephi that stole their family's wealth. It was Laban. When they took all the family's wealth, basically, or not all of it, but a lot of it, probably most of it, to Laban to offer as a
barter trade,
a trade item for the brass plates. They knew that full well. They knew that Nephi didn't take that stuff. It was Laban that took it. But yet they somehow they do that. And then centuries later, you have these Lamanites basically. Actually, it's kind of funny because it's not even the Lamanites usually bring it up. It's actually
other
Nephites who have defected to the Lamanites, and they're looking for free stuff. So they go to the Lamanites. They say, "Hey, you know what? You were wronged. No, not you personally, and not even your great grandparents personally, but at some point in time back in your early history,
500, 600 years ago,
500 or 600 years ago, you were wronged. And these dang Nephites that live today that had nothing to do with your suppression or oppression or whatever, they owe you something. You need to get free stuff from them."
Do you think that's happening today?
Well, they kind of were looking for reparations.
Yeah, somebody
like
is.
that. Yeah, because somebody did somebody wrong a long time ago. So in order to make it right, you got to do that, right? Which has nothing to do with actual forgiveness.
No,
it has to do with vengeance or revenge, right? Now the other group, the second group, that were the Nephites. The Lamanites were these bad dudes, right?
Yeah.
But then you also have these Gadianton robbers that came in amongst the Nephites and the Lamanites.
Mm-hmm.
And what was their shtick? What was that they wanted?
Come together and we'll share our stuff.
But whose stuff are they going to get?
Everybody else's.
That's right. They want free stuff. The Gadianton robbers basically saying, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna use secret combinations. We're going to we'll murder a few people here or there. We're gonna steal stuff. We're gonna take things. We're gonna cover each other's behinds. But as we do that, guess what? We'll share with you in the spoils that we get from the working people. And guess what? We won't have to work.
Yeah.
Because robbers
don't work.
They don't work. They don't produce anything. They just take from other people who are the workers. And so they wanted free stuff. But there was another group of people, and they said, you know what? It's great to be Gadianton robbers because, basically if you get enough of us, we can we can basically go in and rob and steal and plunder
Uh-huh.
our fellow man. That as long as they're working and they have stuff that we can steal, then that's great. We'll have stuff and we can live. But it's a lot easier if you can actually use the government to do the stealing for you. And so that became the people known as the Kingmen. The Kingmen. They wanted access to the government so they could force the government onto people so that those people could then live basically a life of royalty, live like kings, as they say, which was literal. They wanted to use the government to usurp the money from the working class people so that they didn't have to work themselves.
And we have so many people
Looking
that
for
fall
free.
into that category today. Who's going to pay for my college? Who's going to pay for my food?
Yep.
Who's going to pay for my retirement? I want these people to give me a vacation
Yep.
for life. And
Yep. The thing that I find is fascinating is whenever you give somebody else the responsibility to take care of you, then they also have control over you.
that's right.
And that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happened in the Book of Mormon. This is why the Book of Mormon, the Constitution, is such a powerful book, is it literally is outlining how this all works. And how your dad put it together was just astounding. But basically, again, try to bring it into perspective. When you have people who want free stuff, they're willing to do actually a fair amount of work
To do it.
to be able to get free stuff.
They have to lie, cheat, and steal until they've got it.
Yes. And then once they get it, then they feel like, okay, so now we're good, right? This is the reason why the moral basis of a free society is the foundation. I love the fact that was the first thing that your father really,
Pushed.
kind of put together and pushed. And later on, it evolved kind of into, or I shouldn't say evolved, I say progressed into this understanding of the Book of Mormon and the Constitution, because the Book of Mormon has such great examples of people wanting free stuff and how that destroyed their culture and their civilization.
His whole purpose, like I say, each one of these dissertations was written to a different group of people, but they were pretty much written all at the same time. The moral basis of a free society started clear back when he started teaching law at BYU, but was not printed until after he was dead.
Yeah.
And so what did he get in between? Well, he put out Many Are Called, But Few Are Chosen. Then he put out the Book of Mormon and the Constitution. Then
Then
the Great and Abominable Church of the Devil. Like I say,
You see the progression happening here.
it is
In your father's own mind.
But it was widening the audience.
Yes.
The first audience was Leadership Week. The second audience was his students. The third audience was the Melchizedek priesthood holders.
Okay, and go ahead, finish that up, because I want to go back to the students, because
Okay.
they're not just any students.
No, they're not.
They're law students.
They're law students. They're business law students. And at any rate, by the time he gets to the Great and Abominable Church of the Devil, and then let's see, I can't even. My mind's going blank. We've talked about so many things. I'll just open this up and then I can read them.
Go into the introduction of the
Yeah.
of which books they are there.
Yeah. But
Right there.
the Great and Abominable Church of the Devil was written at a time when President Benson and my dad were extremely close friends.
Yeah.
And so the fact of the matter is President Benson determined the name of this book. He gave it its title.
Oh, really? The Great and Abominable Church of the Devil?
Yeah.
That was President Benson's title.
Yeah. This was
Wow.
President Benson's. That was his title, and also the color.
The red color.
The red and black color. He wanted
Yeah.
it to stand out.
Yeah.
And so by the time he got through the last one, The Moral Basis of a Free Society was one of the last ones printed, but one of the first ones written.
Yeah.
And so my brother had to go and get the syllabus, and then go through, and he tried to make changes. You'll notice that almost all of the references that he makes, at one time he's talking about, at this time there were over 1,000 people a day trying to escape from East Germany to get to a free country. And then he goes into the fact, the climate isn't any different, the weather isn't any different, the land isn't any different, the crops aren't any different. He said, but these people are trying to get from point A to point B so they can use that land the way they want to.
Yeah. And they're putting their lives in jeopardy.
Yeah, they were escaping 1,000 a day. We're trying to break out of East Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And so he tries to point out that when you have liberty and you apply it properly to the land that you're on, the situation that you're in, and that is to provide for your family, everything changes. Today, we have raised
we have gone so far down this road, it's ridiculous.
Well, in fact, Dad pointed out to me, kind of interestingly enough, my brother and I have talked about this many times, that in the United States, we have adopted all or part of all 10 points of the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah.
All of them. And well, no, we don't have government controlled lands where we're forcing people to go work on them. Oh, well, no, well, we don't. The government can't tell us where we can go and what we can do. Just try in many of these instances to go from point A to point B, or to open up a business in a different city, or to, I mean, the examples could be as numerous as the sands of the sea.
Yeah.
But the ultimate goal or the ultimate result is always the same. You are being directed, guided, controlled by a higher force which you have elected. I made this statement one time, and I thought it was funny, that all we do is change jailers every 4 years. because we haven't changed anything on the books that give us back our land, give us back our agency, give us back our liberty.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you study this, and America is the only place in modern history where a person can literally earn, grow, and learn. You look at J.D. Vance. Boy, you study his history, and it is amazing. You look at
well, even President-elect in a couple more days, a few more days anyway, Donald Trump. I mean, you look at his background and his father and so forth, and so many of us have examples of immigrants coming into our country legally, and then utilizing the amazing power of the economy. And I know that this is almost now a nasty word, but capitalism has been. But the thing about it is that there are true points on both sides, because capitalism, that's just pure capitalism, if the people are immoral, then basically those who have the most money just trample on the rights and everything else of everybody else, because true capitalism is just about making the most money. So if you have true capitalism and then you have immoral people, then it can be used for evil.
Very much so.
And much more powerfully even than socialism, because it produces income faster than it produces wealth faster than socialism. But if you have a moral people that are under capitalistic understanding, now the reason why I bring this up is as an example. We have rules and regulations. I live in a homeowners association, and they have rules and regulations. I chose to live here, so I'm under those regulations. So I place myself under that. But those rules and regulations are, supposedly for the greater good of the community. The greater good of the community is an important thing now, because what if somebody wanted to come in and put up, let's say, a nuclear,
how about a coal-fired power plant right out there?
Or a coal-fired power plant. Or maybe they wanted to have a pig farm and put it right next to my property.
Yeah.
Right? And now I get to smell the pig farm coming over to my place and so forth.
Joyful.
Right? So that might not be that happy. And there's other things that some people might want to grow pot, for example, and grow pot on their property. Well, okay, so pot is regulated, so again, it's a regulated thing, right? So the drug dealers make all the money anyway. But bottom line is I guess what I'm saying is that for a lot of people, this regulation actually is a protection. And it is if the people will not regulate themselves. If you were a good neighbor, you'd say, hey, you know what? I have some pigs here. what can we do? We need to have pork. We want to have bacon. We want to have, some ham and so forth. Somehow we've got to have pigs in our society. But I understand that you don't want them necessarily right next to your home, and they work it out. But instead, we have to now place that and say, well, we're not going to work it out between you and I. We're going to have the government step in, and they're going to make you not have a pig farm here.
Right.
And you're going to take your pig farm someplace else. And so we don't, I guess this is my point about the moral basis. The government needs to step, or has to step in when people will not live the golden rule, which is what you already mentioned. Basically, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. So don't put your pig farm right next to where I'm trying to raise my kids and family, because it doesn't smell nice.
Well, it's also unsanitary. Pigs are not the most sanitary group, and that's why they're so filled with so many shots and stuff like that, so they don't spread all the
stuff all over,
all the diseases that they have. And it's interesting. You made mention of the golden rule. That was the old law. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you.
And then
Christ upped it.
Mm-hmm.
He says, as I have loved you, love one another.
Yeah.
And so that's up the ante. If you love somebody, truly love your neighbor as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself,
then you would never do anything
then you would do all that you could to help them succeed and have joy in their life. You wouldn't look for ways to demean their family or cause challenges like, raise a pig farm right next to them. You're not going to do that. You're not going to open up a pot farm and start selling it, because you understand the principles of love. Yeah. If you love if you truly love your family, you're not going to harm them. You're not going to look for ways to demean them or destroy them. If you love them, you work with them. Yeah, you're going to have differences of opinion. That's part of life. You can't get around that. But if you love them, you don't hate them because they don't agree with you. You don't drive them out of the house with a gun.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And the Lord has placed us on a higher level now.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's the reason for laws.
It is.
But really, when you think about it, God only gave us 10 commandments. And if everybody in the nation would live the 10 commandments, would there be any reason, any necessity for laws about property, about possessions, about whether or not you can own a particular type of a firearm, whether you want to grow wheat, or whether you want to grow soybeans, or you want to grow corn? But
no,
those things are all regulated by the government today, to the point where farmers don't even really have control of their farms to a large extent. They are told what you can and cannot use, and then they're also told what kind of seed you can use to make sure it's the seed that comes from certain companies and so forth, which supposedly get a bigger yield, but that have problems like gluten, for example. I mean, just throwing that out there. But, people in Europe, they don't have gluten issues. We have gluten issues here because we've modified the wheat so much and so bad that it's caused it so that the body almost rejects it.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about raising wheat in one of these books, and I can't remember which one. I think it's in the moral basis.
There's a lot of content there.
But in one of them, he talks about the fact that there was a farmer that raised chickens, and he raised his own wheat to feed them. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Government stepped in, fined him because he raised too much wheat, or the fact that he even raised wheat at all.
Yeah.
And tore his business apart. And he finally said, I'm moving to Australia, which he did. He said, over there, at least I can raise chickens and wheat. And it's a case where they literally destroyed his business. And so he moved to Australia. And it gives it name, number, and the whole 9 yards. He talks about the fact that when you put yourself in a situation where government is telling you what you can raise, how much of it you can raise, and who you can sell it to, and what kind of thing you can raise.
And what price it's going to be.
Yeah, they know you are no longer a free person. You are a slave. And people they look at that, well, no, it's for the good and safety of society. Just ask them. And yet the reality is, it is the very destruction of society because it creates an immoral people. They start looking for ways, well, they can't tell me how much wheat I can grow. Well, I'll just grow this in my greenhouse back here. Nobody will know. So you just break the law to feed your family, and all of a sudden you're in trouble.
Right. It's a never-ending cycle. The more you try to restrict people in their laws, the more they try to find ways around the laws.
Exactly.
Which creates more need for more laws so you can cover all the loopholes that people have figured out how to get around. And so you have greater and greater and more oppressive laws that are happening. And it's all because the people will not govern themselves.
Exactly.
This is what Joseph Smith talked about when he said, it says,
I teach the people correct principles and let them govern themselves.
That's right.
And that's the way the Lord is. That's his whole premise for life.
Yeah. But that's not how we're living today in the United States of America. Even though we have more freedoms than a lot of countries do, the fact remains is that we have allowed the government to usurp things that we don't even have the ability to give the government because these are things coming from God.
Yes.
These rights are from God. They're God-given rights, not government or even people-given rights. God gave us the rights.
Well,
and he gave us all the materials.
Our founding fathers tried to establish that, and they put enough restraints on the government that should have allowed us to have these liberties.
Mm-hmm.
But the government, through manipulation and this is good for you, and how are we going to pay for the government? Oh, we'll just put in place an income tax. And it won't be very much, 2%. Now it's some people are paying as high as 55% of their income to live in the United States, in California. That's
the Nephites were opposed to a much smaller tax than that were being levied. Well, it's about that. It's about half. I think if I remember correctly, when the Nephites were saying, you know what, we are sick and tired of paying tribute to the king of the Lamanites, and we're giving over half of our labor to them, and for what?
Just so you can live.
Well, so that the king can live like a king.
And nobody else over there has to work either.
And he doesn't have to work, which was one of the really interesting things about the laws of Mosiah, when Mosiah basically was saying, hey, you know what, I am your king, and yet you see me out there working. You see me out there, laboring.
I'm supporting myself. I'm not taking money from you to support me. But this is what it's kind of become. Mm-hmm.
That's why I think in the Book of Mormon it says that there couldn't be a happier people.
Well, that was at one point. That was it. Yeah, but that was after
the time of Christ.
Yeah.
But what law were they living then after Christ?
Well, it's interesting. You should ask that, because if we start to understand it properly, it would be called the United Order or the Law of Consecration. Not it, we like to think of the United Order as that system. No, that's a step below the Law of Consecration.
Mm-hmm.
And they only lived it for 187 years, and then they got blown out of the water. The fourth generation didn't all pass away before they had all completely lost it.
Mm-hmm.
And how did they lose it? They lost it due to greed and pride.
Yeah.
And that's
which your dad goes into
in great detail.
Much detail in these books.
He tries to point out that when you give up your rights, your liberties, because you want to, what is it they say, that you try to pay people to give you security? And when you give it, you lose both. You lose your security.
I think that was it George Washington that had something that the man who is willing to give up his freedom for security.
That's it.
Will neither receive security. Basically, he says you'll lose both.
You lose both
your freedom and your security, because no one cares about your security more than you do. So they will let things pass or lapse or they won't pay attention to it like you do. And then when you pay somebody else to do that, for them it's just a paycheck.
Yeah.
For you, it's your life, it's your family, it's your ability to provide.
Well, that's why they gave us the Second Amendment, and it's the Second Amendment. I can't even talk anymore.
We have been here for a while, but I really hope that you guys are enjoying this conversation half as much as I am, because this has been this is foundational stuff that
It is.
I don't think that our kids are getting this in any curriculum.
No.
Because you don't even really hear about this much, even within the church, as far as that's concerned. I mean, you do hear some
of it,
but we haven't really had too many people talking about the Constitution and its importance and following it and so forth for a while. And part of that has to do with the fact that the church is a worldwide church.
Yes.
And the church's goal is to get the gospel to all the nations of the earth. And a lot of the nations of the earth are socialist and communist. So you don't want to basically just, tell them that, we're not going to support that form of government or whatever if we're going to have a missionary program. So I understand what the church's position is on that. They have to make some compromises.
But that does not apply to us in this country, which
Right.
was established by God for a specific purpose. You were talking about...
By the way, since you brought that up, and it happens to be the next our next slide here, you have Elder L. Tom Perry, and he gave this talk actually up at BYU, Idaho.
Oh,
in a devotional that was given, and this was actually in 2010. Well, let's see, it was 2010. I had a friend of mine who was a personal friend of L. Tom Perry's, of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And he said, I'd like to give your book to Brother Perry or Elder Perry for Christmas. And that was Christmas of 2010, or 2011. So he gave him the book. And then about a month and a half later, in February of 2012, Elder Perry went up to BYU, Idaho, and delivered this amazing speech, which was so powerful that because they don't put this stuff in the Ensign all the time, but basically,
No.
So later that year, and the Ensign came out in December of 2012 on page 29, his speech that he gave up at BYU, Idaho. This is a portion of the speech here.
okay.
So Lee, I'm not sure if you've seen this before. You may have.
I have not.
But he said, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is truly a worldwide church. So we have to deal with world issues, right? We have to be careful not to be too rah-rah USA kind of thing.
Well,
right?
there's only, 195 countries or something like that?
Yeah, and we're just one of them. He says, nevertheless, it is important to realize that the church could never have become what it is today without the birth of a great nation, the United States of America. And then he goes on to say, the United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon.